Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Housing Washington. Welcome to Tacoma. I am excited to see you here. I'm excited to be here. I am here just helping moderate this panel. I'm Claire Petersky. I'm a manager at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission in the Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities Division. And we are aware that there are many opportunities for public land that can be used for affordable housing, and maybe not everybody at the conference knows that this land is available. This is you're only getting like a little taste test here. So I know that like we have DNR is going to be speaking, but I also know the Department of Commerce has some land. You're going to be hearing from Sound Transit, but I also know Metro Transit has some land. So there are, this is just a brief sample of what can be accessed to develop affordable housing in our state using public land. So with all of that, I'm going to run across this thing. I think it'll do funny things if I'll use this mic. Otherwise, I think I'll get feedback. So this is who's going to be speaking today. I'm Claire Petersky. I'm actually not presenting. I'm just kind of doing this introduction. We have Steve Butler, who is from the Municipal Research something Council. He'll tell you what the S stands for because I've already forgotten. But I have been so happy with how much energy he's put into this, and he can kind of give kind of this overview and overall perspective. We have Robert Hammill from the Department of Natural Resources talking specifically about the property that they have available, and a presentation by Thatcher, Imboden from Sound Transit about Sound Transit and what they're up to. So that's what we've got in terms of the presenters. And so you'll get, this is the agenda. We'll get some of this overview and some Washington local government examples and come through this. And at the very end, we will take questions from the audience. With luck, we'll have time. I plan to be also monitoring the Whova app such that if you are a shy person, but you feel fine doing it with your thumb, you know, then tap it out and we'll attempt to answer those questions. So with that, I'm going to hand the baton, the metaphorical baton, over and sit down for now. So.
Thanks, Claire. Welcome, everybody. You are the stalwarts. Your last session before the party. This is tough. This is tough, right? I'm Steve Butler, and MRSC, Municipal Research and Services Center.
Yes,
right. So how many people, quick tally, how many people are from local governments? Okay, nice. How many are from kind of the nonprofit development side? And how about everybody else? All right, a good mix, a good mix. So I'm going to be really talking about an overview of kind of why we should all be thinking about collectively using surplus public lands to encourage construction of new affordable housing and the retention of existing. But I'll just say, as you probably most you in the audience know, this is not a new concept. This has been around for a while, right? I mean, we've been talking about it for decades. I've been hearing and talking about it for decades. So it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward concept, but for those of you who have tried to implement it, it's harder than you think. It's pretty complex, a lot of steps. So that's the reason why I think we're wanting to move forward today is this group. Glad you're here, and that the state legislature has made it easier, not easy, but easier to perhaps set up a program at the local level so we can all use it together. Next slide. So everybody in this room knows the points on this slide. So I felt almost embarrassed to look at it, put it on there, but I think it's just important just to highlight. I mean, housing is a really challenging issue, right? There's no one quick fix. You've heard about that throughout the conference and probably been thinking about this for months, years, maybe decades again. So, you know, really important to use as many techniques, methods as possible to try and move the needle forward. And surplus public land is one option to try and do that. Okay, so typically in the not so distant past, Disposing of public property below market rates was prohibited. You know, the whole Washington State Constitution issue of gift of public funds. But the good news is that there are statutory exceptions that allow it to be done in certain situations. Now, I'm a land use planner by profession, not a municipal attorney. We do have municipal attorneys at MRSC, so you got to take what I'm saying with a little bit of a grain of salt, but from a non-lawyer perspective. But basically, you know, public agencies are allowed to dispose of surplus public or real property at low or no cost if for a public benefit. And those properties can be distributed, sold below market, given, in some cases, to public, private, and non-governmental entities. So on this slide, I just want to point out for those of you who are maybe been going along for a little bit, and I know at some point in the past year or two or three, there's been some issues about, well, how does affordable housing fit into this whole public benefit side? So in the last legislative session that just ended this past spring, House Bill 1695 clarified the appropriateness of using surplus public land for affordable housing, because it defined that as a public benefit, and that it would pertain to both the creation of rental and permanently affordable housing. So that's a good thing. So next up, I'm going to really quickly, hopefully quickly, go through just a few examples of some cities and what they're doing. I'm going to just hit the highlights. There's more information that we have at MRSC and our various topic web pages. But just want to let you know before I turn over to reps from DNR and Sound Transit that cities are involved in it as well. But with that, so the next few slides are going to have that city focus, but I want to just point out and make clear that there's a lot of different entities, public and semi-public, that also can follow along the same line. So you're going to hear about state transit authorities, but counties, special districts, public development authorities, many others, the list goes on, can sort of properly dispose of what we're going to be calling surplus public property. So with Seattle, really quickly, Seattle is, it's kind of not surprising, right? Largest city in our state, has a very active program. It's administered by some departments in the city, and I'm always not quite sure what to call City Light because it's a utility, so it's sort of a department, but a utility. They're also very much involved in partnering with various organizations. You're going to hear in some detail from Thatcher, they're partnering with Sound Transit, but they also have other partners, and one example I just want to highlight is Homestead Community Land Trust. So Seattle, as you would expect, is very much involved in this effort. But it's not just the big cities. Next couple examples, I want to point out that smaller cities can also get into this game. Bellingham has a fairly active program. They have a lot of good information on their website. They've done a detailed surplus lands inventory that you can look at. They have a lot of useful information, so anybody who's interested in using surplus public lands for affordable housing, they're right there, and they actually, they've used it a few times. One example I'll just point out is that they've partnered with the Kulshan Community Land Trust to produce a number of affordable units. So small cities can do it too. Bellingham, maybe medium-sized city. Ellensburg, another city on the smaller side, I guess compared to Seattle, we're all smaller, right? But anyway, Ellensburg also has a very active program. They've been identified a number of sites, and they actually, past couple, 3 years, put out an RFP for a property that they identified and declared to be usable for affordable housing. That was in 2021, issued an RFP, and they're working now with a private developer who's going to be, is proposing to construct 57 affordable units. So that project is in process. Spokane, okay, going from the smaller medium to larger size. Spokane has been involved in this realm for a number of years, even before the state law came in that kind of basically authorized, specifically authorized it, and so they used what they called an asset transfer policy, and so they've partnered in several different instances over the years with various public development authorities that exist in Spokane, and so they've done surplus public land transfers, not only for affordable housing, but for a lot of other purposes, to encourage some industrial development, some mixed-use development, and the like. But at this point, they have recently come up with some land that has been sold and for mixed-use development that will include a number of affordable housing units. And last but not least, our host city, Tacoma. Again, fairly active program. The city partners very directly with the Tacoma Public Redevelopment Authority, among other entities, and they have sort of a similar approach and policies related to the use of surplus lands for affordable housing. Those of you may have read in the newspaper or online that they recently issued an RFP for some four properties, and they were wanting it to be used for affordable housing. And Habitat for Humanity made a proposal for one of the sites, and that was accepted, and they're going through the final details right now to get that sort of worked out. Talking with their staff over the next few months and years, short term, they really want to develop a more proactive approach. They say that people come to them all the time and say, hey, that piece of property, you own that, right? We want to use it for development. And so what they're wanting to do, like many of the folks in the room, would be to have a very active inventory of surplus lands that are available for various purposes, including affordable housing. So that's a really quick overview of why we do it, what it is, and just giving you a few examples of some cities that are involved with it. So now I'm going to turn things over to Robin.
Hello, my name is Robin Hammill. I work for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. I am the Assistant Division Manager, and I supervise all of our acquisitions and divestitures for the state. I've been doing this. I worked my first 20 years in aquatic resources, but my last 5 years I've been working uplands, doing our disposals. What am I doing here? Most of you might not know that DNR owns more than just forests. We have a lot of property. We have 3 million acres. Although a lot of the stuff is not the surplus lands, we do have a surplus lands list that we submit to Commerce. Most of our property is trust lands, so it's a little bit different, but that doesn't mean we can't sell it, and it doesn't mean we can't dispose of it. I want you guys to all think about those people who raised your hands of those local government. Can you raise your hands again if you're semi-quasi-government, local government? We can sell directly to you. This is where the rest of you need to look at those hands and see where you can partner. And that's why we're here. So think about that. Think about partnership, because that's where your best results are going to come from. This is a land or a map of all the state lands. This is all stuff DNR owns. Most of it came at statehood, and we have different trusts. We are what's called a fiduciary responsibility to the trust. We are a trust manager. We manage these for all the people of the state. And each of these little bits, you can see common school, agricultural, these are places that the revenue we get from them come, or this is where they go. But, like I said before, we are a fiduciary responsibility. That means we have to think about our trust mandate, and that means that we have to make money for the trust and give that back to the people. Most of the stuff that we do goes back to, say, building houses. And that goes all the way back to the Constitution. So unfortunately, if it is a trust property, and this will come up a little bit later, we can't just give it away because of the Constitution laws. However, there are other properties that we've gotten in other ways that do go on that surplus property list that we have some different rules. So, like I said, we own 3 million acres. We have forest land, which most of you are probably very aware of. We have agricultural land. The whole east side of the state, we lease for grazing, dry land, wheat, orchards, cherries, you name it. We actually have commercial leases. You may not know that we own a Bartell's in Arlington. We lease to a Costco. We have an empty building in Issaquah. We have commercial real estate too. But the lands most of you guys are probably interested are these lands. Don't read it, it's gobbledygook. But we have what we call urban lands and we have transition lands. So generally, DNR is always managed for resource management. But as you guys know, there's encroachment urban growth boundary, we have properties now that we call urban lands, which truly are urban. We own a piece of property on 2nd and Lenore in downtown Seattle. You probably all don't know that. We also have transition lands. These are lands that are, you know, kind of on the border. They're right on the edge of the GMA. Sometimes we need them to come in. Sometimes, you know, we're looking at comp plan amendments. I'm not a planner, so I do real estate. But we have these lands that are transition lands. Generally, we can't use them for resource management. In the past, if they were zoned for housing, DNR disposed of them typically at auction. DNR is now looking at different ways we can help with the housing crisis. To look at maybe these lands would be better served instead of just selling them at the highest bidder, to maybe working with local jurisdictions to see if we can't transfer them at fair market value directly to them. So these are those ways to look at these maps and these properties in a different light. We actually have a great viewing tool. I'm not gonna lie, some of the DNR stuff is crazy, but we have a great viewing tool and we have a great GIS department. And it's not the best, but I have business cards if you want. The link was ugly, the URL just looked horrible, so I didn't put it on the slide. But we have a great viewing tool that not only overlays all of our transition lands, but it also shows you all of the lands that we own. This actually has a list that you can go on, you can see where it's at. It's hard to tell on this list, but like where the county, where it's located, what's the tax parcel, what is its designation? Is it urban, is it transition? To let you know what's out there. So we have a really handy tool that lets you know even what we have, but nobody knows it's out there. So, like I talked about before, DNR is limited in the way it can dispose of property, and that's, you know, for good measure. Nobody wanted us at statehood to just sell everything off. We actually managed to maintain a lot. One of the things they also made us do was keep it at fair market value, so we just didn't deplete the corpus of the trust. So, like I said in the past, a lot of times we do that, we can sell at public auction. And I'll show you a couple examples where recently, if it's a parcel that was zoned for housing, we auction it. We have to let local jurisdictions know that we're gonna do this, then we take it out, we get an appraisal, we put a minimum bid amount, and we auction it. It's pretty funky to go one of them and think, okay, I'm doing this for the state. But the other way we can do this, and this actually only happened in the 80s, and it started from a sense of we were disposing of property sometimes that maybe local jurisdictions wanted. So now we have to notify a local jurisdiction, and if we're going to dispose of something, they let us know. They have a 60-day, and it's not a true first right of refusal, but it's like, hey, we'd be interested in this parcel. And then we can sell it directly to that governmental entity for the appraised value. You get a deed from the governor, you get no fees attached. It's pretty, I wouldn't say it's simple because nothing's simple with the state, but overall it's one of our simplest transactions. One of those things is, and this is where I was talking about those little jurisdictions, we do our best with notification and outreach, but if we don't know you exist, we can't let you know. So it's something to get on a list and let us know that if you're a governmental entity that is able to own property, then we would like to notify you when we're going to do these sort of things in case you're interested. There's a lot of, we've had a lot recently, and I think the housing community has gone through that. There are a lot more quasi-governmental entities out there. And I think with a little AG review that we've been able to decide that those are entities that we can transfer to. So just letting you all know out there. So the process is honestly pretty simple compared to most other things I do for the state, which is very complicated always. But if there is a property that we are going to dispose of, or if going through a transition list, you see a property that you guys think would work, you reach out and you can send a letter to CPL, which will come to me. CPL stands for our Commissioner of Public Lands, which is Hillary Franz, saying that you are interested in purchasing. After that, we would talk about it and make sure that this is a property that we were willing to dispose of. We might not dispose of it for any number of reasons, but we just may. At that point, we would just sign an interagency agreement and we talk about who does what. You're not on the hook for anything, and then we would go through. We do the notification if it hadn't been done, if you'd just done this cold call. And after that, then we would just get an appraisal of the property. After that, it's like if we can all agree to the price, we sign a transfer agreement. DNR has to take it to the Board of the Natural Resources for approval, but if it was for fair market value, I've never seen them deny one. And then we send the deed to the governor, they sign it, and you have fee title. So those are, it's not probably as easy as it sounds, but it is one of the most simple transactions that we can do. So some of these success stories, you guys were trying, and you guys might not have heard of them. So this is a property we had up in Kitsap County. It's within the Silverdale urban growth area. It's not, Silverdale's not an actual city. We had actually tried to do an exchange with a private developer who wanted to develop it, but there was a lot of public backlash on that. So we ended up going through, and it ended up getting partially funded in multiple ways. There's a public access trail that runs at the bottom of the property or along Clear Creek out through the top. So the public really wanted that to be maintained. So Kitsap County got a commerce grant from the capital budget of $2 million to maintain that open area. But then Kitsap County went and cobbled together and worked with other partners to get funding from like the fire department so they can put a fire station there. But they also got funding to develop workforce housing to help pay for this property. And then this property will be developed. We're about to close on it. And the intent is for a lot of this property to have workforce housing on it. It's in a great area. The hospital is just south. There's Costco. There's all sorts of amenities. This is a place that should be developed. This is not a place that DNR should have held on to. And the fact that we were able to hold the property while they were able to get together funding was a great success story. This is one we're working on, or this is another one that we did. Not quite the same, but this is what happens sometimes when we take it to public auction. This is a small little 7.5 acre parcel that was zoned low-density residential, but it's literally in the middle of the city of West Richland. There's a park to the north. There's some easements to it. We ended up taking it to public auction. Yes, it'll probably become McMansions, but it was still better than sitting in our inventory doing nothing, where at least some houses can be built on it. These are things that I'm currently working on. So Pierce County, very local. There's this property we called Frederickson South. We were going to take this to auction, but Pierce County put their hand up and said, hey, we would be interested in purchasing this. So Pierce County Community Development Corporation said we'd be interested in getting this. So we've been working with them. First, we had to make sure that they were a governmental entity, which we weren't even sure of. But after a lot of, back and forth with attorneys, yes, it is determined that this is a corporation or a quasi-governmental entity that we could transfer to. So right now, we have an appraised value. They're just working on getting the funding. And as soon as that funding happens, we'll sign that purchase and sale agreement. We'll take it to the board, and we'll transfer to them. This kind of goes in with next door's conversation. If you were in with the zoning and development, there needs to be a little bit of work on this, but they want to put a whole bunch of houses on here, and we think that'd be a great idea. Another one that we're working on, and this has been a long-term plan, and this is in a bigger picture of just housing and making land available for housing. 3 years ago, the property, this is what it looked like. Right now, this is not. This was a 300 acre in the middle, orchard in the middle of the city of Richland. It no longer conformed to what the local areas. It's housing all around. Right below it is a Target and other commercial ventures. Sorry, my brain is going. But we worked really closely with the city to find a way to help them out. They knew that they needed housing. So there's a whole bunch. We got 8 lots out of this. The lot 5, the small one in the center, and lot 4, we worked with the local jurisdictions, and lot 5 is going to become a park, and we'll sell it to the city of Richland. Lot 4 is going to be a school. We actually adjusted that parcel a little bit, but we worked really closely with the local jurisdictions. 7 and 8 will auction off for high density. Lot 6 and lot 2 are going to be medium density, and we did low density residential on lot 1 and lot 3. This was all before some of the stuff that happened that says there needs to be more affordable housing, so maybe things will change. But this is an area where DNR was able to collaborate with the local jurisdictions to see how we can help and get housing and get property on the market, because we all know that finding property just in those areas is one of the most difficult things there is. So future opportunities. One is we understand we can sell directly to those governmental entities, but they need funding. They need to find ways to connect with funding. That's not necessarily in my wheelhouse. DNR overall is working on hiring a policy person for housing and also a grants person to see if we can help connect those. Another story that we're working on right now that I didn't put because it's kind of stalled, but we have a piece of property in the city of Westport. I don't know if you all know, Westport is a big fishing village. And there's a lot of people that probably don't have a lot of income, but yet a lot of people are moving out there and building giant McMansions. So we had a piece of property that we were looking to sell, but the city looked at us and said, we'd really like to find a way to work with you to make this affordable housing. So we're still working with them and trying connecting them with funding so that they can do this work, because they've never done anything like that, but they know their fishermen need a place to live, and if everybody else keeps coming in and building big houses, it's not going to work for them. So helping people find funding. Another thing is engaging with local jurisdictions and land use planning. We have properties that should be developed for housing, should have higher densities than they do. However, being the state, they want to use us for open space. So it's hard for us to go out and talk with people and say, you know, this really shouldn't be this low a zoning, it should be a higher density. And so just working on that. And then this is not my wheelhouse, but I will say that DNR has been looking at ways to explore leasing property for workforce housing. We do have these admin properties, and there are places where DNR can't hire our own staff. We have region offices and foresters out in Forks, and we can't fill those positions because there is no workforce housing out there. So we're looking for ways to even develop housing on our own properties so that those people can have a job and have a place that they can live and still do their job and like we need them to. This is also very common. We're working on other places with Forest Service and other areas. But just those are those opportunities. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here, doing my best to talk about some things I know and some things that I don't know. But we're here. If you have any questions or want to reach out, please, I have business cards, and we can try and get you a map of DNR and what we own and get you the link to the Urban Transition Lands Viewer. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Thatcher Imboden. I'm the Director of Community Development at Sound Transit. The two main takeaways I'm just going to deliver now. One is we do this work in partnership. When you're talking about government land, public land, you're talking about intersectionality between lots of different public interests, and I think going at it together is always better. And second, really meant that this presentation is really aimed at agents of change or change makers, which I hope all of you are. So I hope that you get something out of this presentation. So Sound Transit, we're a transit agency, we're a special purpose government, and I think in general, you can think of this presentation as really applying beyond just a transit agency doing this work, but really special purpose governments more broadly, whether it's libraries, schools, parks, districts. They all somewhat are similar. Special purpose governments often can be very insular and very focused on their special purpose, right? That's why they exist. For Sound Transit, it's to provide people rides places. However, people don't ride transit to ride transit. They ride transit to go somewhere. So really, our transit service is in service to supporting really the people and the communities in which people are trying to move between. We have evolved over the last 20 plus years of existence to kind of really talk about how do we approach our transit delivery. We had to We started with nothing, so we had to get buses out there. We had to get the Sounder commuter rail running, the Tacoma link here, and link up in Seattle. That takes a lot of work. And how we do that work and how we deliver our services kind of gets back to both the communities we serve, which we're going to talk more about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about transit-oriented development. I think most of you probably are somewhat familiar, but just in case you aren't, we're talking about higher densities next to higher frequencies, dependable transit with reduced automobile kind of orientation, less parking typically, oriented so that people can walk places, bike people places, roll places, or take a quick transit ride, and has usually lots of services nearby. We are building transit service. And in building transit service, it means that we are buying property. And so as we are buying property, some of that property is used for construction staging. You need space to lay down. When we're building tunnels, you need a lot more space on the surface because you can't store stuff underground. So, what do we do with that extra land is really the subject of what we're talking about today. We have a variety of goals. I was not going to list them all, but I think in general you can kind of think of them as, we're trying to create TOD because again that generates riders for us and supports local and regional growth plans. We are wanting to think about again how does the property that we have, how does it get used, how does it serve our passengers? Again, to the extent that we can. And then we also have a big focus, which we're also going to talk about, which is about creating affordable housing. And then we also have a separate focus on value capture of how are we capturing financial value back to our agency, because I think it's important for me to note, as a transit agency, transit is a public benefit. It is a public good, and in America, that means it's subsidized. And so we do have a natural conflict, right? When we talk about creating affordable housing, we all know that it takes subsidy to do that. And we know that to provide transit and build transit, it takes a subsidy to do that. And so the question is, how do you kind of figure out how to not create these unicorn expectations that you can't deliver on? How do you actually deliver public benefits that our policymakers and therefore really the public has for us? So we're going to talk about that. Let's see here. So this is probably where we want to talk about it. So Sound Transit, as we're building transit services, we are also seeing that, we know that we work within a context of a larger system. And we know that that system is broken, whether it is wage and income and wealth disparities, or the fact that we have systemic underproduction of housing in this country and in this region, and a variety of other issues. But we do know, studies have shown that when you add high capacity, quality, dependable transit, it is a nice amenity, and people move there. Property values go up, rents go up, and people get displaced. That is something that we have seen here in Seattle. It's values in Seattle have increased more than 25%, closer to stations than outside of stations. So that's how the nexus with us comes to be. So when Sound Transit did our latest ballot initiative, to do that, we had to go to the state legislature. And we also had to work with communities about what exactly is going to be in this ballot initiative. As a part of that process, we heard a lot about displacement concerns that had been happening in Rainier Valley and beyond. And as a part of that, the state legislature said, yeah, you can go ask the voters, but there's going to be some conditions. And one of those conditions, and you can thank Frank Chop, is what they call 80-80-80, which said, look, if you're going to be buying property, then you need to use basically the vast majority of your property, at least 80% of it, to create affordable housing. You need to first offer it to these entities, qualified entities, which the state's determined to be local governments, housing authorities, and nonprofit developers. And that if they take that property from you, then at least 80% of the units created on that property need to be affordable at 80% of AMI or below. And very cleverly also went beyond and said, you know what, we're going to give you a tool to help facilitate that because we know that land values increase substantially near transit. And since Sound Transit's buying land, right, sometimes 10 years before the line opens, that land appreciates like crazy. And most recently in Redmond, we had a property that appreciated over 8 years, 347%. So They said you can discount property, you can do no-cost transfers. It's all subject to navigating federal rules. That is something, a discussion probably for a different day. So how are we doing, right? So we've been implementing this, and I should say that our program dates back, our first project, I believe, opened in 2009 in Federal Way next to the Federal Way Transit Center. So some of the stuff predates the 8880 statute. We have about 3,100 housing units total, both income restricted and non-income restricted housing that are in various stages of development with our development partners. So that's not stuff we're currently planning, but stuff with actual developers. And about 2,300 of those are income restricted affordable housing. You can see the numbers for kind of the last 5 years, and then going forward, we expect somewhere around 1,300 over the next 5 years opening, if we can figure out the money. And so, we can talk more about that. I will also just mention, again, we are a special purpose government. We are not housing builders, right? So we partner with developers. We partner with local jurisdictions. We partner with the state and the commission on trying to figure out how do we actually make these things happen, because building affordable housing at high opportunity areas with this amazing transit access to jobs, to education, to healthcare, that is exactly what the policymakers want. That's what our voters said that they wanted, and so we're trying to figure out how do we facilitate that. As Bob likes to say, these are waterfront properties. So how do we facilitate affordable housing? So I think it's also important, just a little bit, and without getting into the details of the whole planning process, but I think it's an important takeaway as people who are change agents, that surplus property, you don't want to end up in a situation where it's like, yeah, we got some remnant property to sell. That is kind of, in my opinion, a failure of process, because that is usually when you end up with undevelopable property. Not always, but again, when you end up with remnant properties from a capital project, it means that you weren't planning about what you were going to do with the rest of the property. So we start at station planning, thinking about where are we putting stations, how does it lay out, what are the options around how we could lay out stations. We explore opportunities. How are you sizing the property? What kind of construction staging needs do you have? And ideally, as a filter, because I cannot buy property for TOD, but we can buy property for staging. If the people who are planning staging needs can think about, okay, well, we need this many acres and it needs to be here, 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 we can look at TOD then as a secondary consideration. Because again, we're buying property from people who often don't want to sell. So it's important that we're only taking it for transit purposes. So as we go through that, we can kind of tweak things, right? Tweak it so that we can not put a critical station utility right through what will future be a TOD space and cost millions of dollars to move. So this is why it's important to start that process early, so you don't end up being like, oh, if this thing was 10 feet wider, we could have a double-loaded corridor. That's kind of what we get at. And then the process is like, great, we've got a TOD opportunity. How do we figure out what is it we're trying to achieve, and how do we actually bring on a development partner who can then go through their fun part of the project of permitting, getting the money, closing the deal, building it, and getting tenants, and then maintaining it, right? So, I kind of already covered some of this, which is, you got to think about the layouts. You got to think about what other infrastructure might be needed, and what are we building versus what might be needed in general, like especially in the suburban jurisdictions that were built post-World War II that have giant blocks and low density, utilities, water mains that are undersized. The developer, if you're building affordable housing, leaving it all to the affordable housing developer is a problem. So that's a problem we know we're trying to get ahead of. And then certainly zoning issues, title issues. How did the property originally get acquired? What kind of rights do people have? For Sound Transit, that's not been as big of an issue, but I know coming from Minnesota, I know that a lot of the public works acquired property, like transportation projects, how they acquired the property can completely jack you up if you ever want to try to redevelop transportation property. Obviously, we do not do this work by ourselves. When we go at it alone, it's usually worse. So we try to work very early with local jurisdictions, with affordable housing funders, on thinking about how do we actually, how are we going to partner, right? A lot of our partnerships have been focused on aligning affordable housing resources with our property and jointly identifying the goals of an RFP before we issue it. So we can jointly issue an RFP with the Seattle Office of Housing or King County or Arch And we have a great partnership with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission on track for bonds, and we're trying to figure out how can we partner. We've also partnered with the Amazon Housing Equity Fund to bring, again, additional low-cost debt and some grant dollars to our properties. And between these partnerships, we are starting to see the fruits of these partnerships where we're able to achieve more units quicker than we would otherwise, because the system would generally say, well, there aren't enough resources, so if you're being too pragmatic, you end up with less. And if you can get some pre-commitments, you can actually say, well, how far we could do that. An example of that would be in Redmond, where we had a large property next to the Overlake Village Station, where if you took a pragmatic approach, you'd say on the east side, 150 units, and we could build 150 units of market with some inclusionary and MFTE units. That would be the pragmatic approach. But the city and Sound Transit staff, my team, many of them are in this room, said, let's do something more. How far can we go? And so, we said, let's go for a 100% affordable housing project. It's so we selected Bellwether and their community-based organization partners to develop 333 units of affordable housing at that location, and it's going to be a big lift to get done. But again, if we took a very pragmatic, what does the system deliver, we would not get that kind of outcome. And then I think, I don't need to you guys all know these issues. As we look forward to our pipeline and we're trying to figure out how do we actually get these projects done, gap funding, big issue. The local infrastructure, the streets, the roads, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully CHIP funding can help with some of that. That needs to be a permanent program and make it work. And then TOD supportive zoning. Every city has some sort of zoning or permitting issue that has to get resolved. Doesn't matter which one. A lot of times it's parking, but it's not always parking. Some of our more recent, the first project under our 80-80-80 statute was the Cedar Crossing project. It was also our first joint RFP with the Seattle Office of Housing, where they brought $15 million of their funding to the table, and we brought heavily discounted property. We got it down to about $6.75 million. It was an $18.5 million property, and at the time, federal rules would not allow me to go beyond 6.75. So that's how we made that deal happen. It was 254 units, a partnership between Bellwether Housing and Mercy Housing. It's a fantastic project right next to the Roosevelt Station, and it did require more coordination because it was next to an underground station. And then more recently, the Rise and Blake House just opened with, again, a Bellwether and Plymouth Housing project on First Hill, 365 units stacked project. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to dive too deeply into these. But I think, in kind of closing, as we continue to learn, right? Every time we issue an RFP, we get feedback from the development community. We get feedback from our funders. We have our own lessons learned, right? And we try to continue to apply it to the next one. And as we've gone over in time, as we continue to learn, the more we can act with intention on the front end, saying, yeah, we're trying to work towards affordable housing, and the sooner we can do that, usually the more time we can spend on trying to solve the really challenging, vexing issues that a project has, instead of fighting the battles of, should we do market rate housing or should we do affordable housing? Because we only have so much staff time, right? And so, the sooner we can pre-commit to what it is we're doing, we can start figuring out how do we get retail space and affordable housing to actually work, right? How do you get that funded and work? Because at the end of the day, people want things near their train station. They don't want to have to walk for 4 blocks to the services. So, in closing, as our past board chair, Kent Keel, likes to say, we're a transit agency, but we got a side hustle in affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't see any questions on the app, but we may have questions from the audience, and I see hands already raised. Oh, there's tons of them. So I'm just going to run over with I'm going to give this mic over to Bob Peterson, my colleague, and he is going to run those.
Hi, thank you. So I work for the city of Tacoma. We have a surplus land policy. To date, the only people or organizations that have ever been interested are like our beloved partners, Habitat, or Mercy Housing, or others who we essentially trust to build affordable units and then later keep them affordable. And so we don't have any monitoring in place. Recently, we've had interest from a private developer who we know he wants to make money, and he's telling us he's going to build affordable units. And so we're at this decision point where, do we change our policy to only allow a certain type of organization to participate with us, or do we put in place monitoring, which honestly is a huge pain in the ass? So I'm curious what you've seen around the state, any of you, do agencies monitor these units after they give away this land or sell it? Or do they have a list, and if you're not on that list, you don't get the land? Or are there other more creative ways to solving this issue? Would love any advice on this.
Does this one talk? Oh, good. For Sound Transit, so we don't have a compliance program set up, at least at this time. However, we do have affordable housing covenants that we have on property because we are, again, have statutory requirements. We do partner with other agencies, right? So there are covenants and monitoring being done. It's being done through other government agencies that we are partnered with. It is not, there's been questions and discussions about what are we going to do long term around that because we may not always have a commission or the Seattle Office of Housing. Our covenants typically match whatever the longest, it's usually at least 50 years. And so I think, this conversation has come up, but so far we've really relied as a special purpose government agency that isn't necessarily sure we have the ability to directly do it ourselves, at least from a resourcing perspective. We've probably gotten away with being connected to the commission and being connected to the Office of Housing or ARCH or King County. It's not the answer that people probably want to hear, but it's. Oh yeah, thank you. So my great colleague there, Mara, reminded me that, as a general thing, as it gets to the question that you were asking around the type of partner you're working with, since state statute requires us to work with local governments, housing authorities, or nonprofit developers, we are working with mission-based organizations. And so the likelihood that these properties are going to be flipped or like just people renting them out of compliance is probably a little bit less. I don't know, Claire, do you have thoughts on that?
And I'm also hoping maybe Steve has some thoughts about this too. But we work with for-profit developers at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, issuing issuing bonds and providing the associated low-income housing tax credit. So we do the compliance. So if this particular for-profit developer was interested in bonds and tax credits, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. But if you're serving higher incomes than can be served by that kind of a program, then I don't have an answer for you. And I'm going to pass it down to Steve if he has any comments.
Not really. It's just I'm putting on my former local government planning director hat. It's a good issue. It's a tough issue. And you have to put as many conditions on as possible without trying to discourage the private sector folks that are trying to do it. But yeah, so it's a lot, in some ways easier, I hate to say easier, if you have a defined set of partners that are probably more mission-based. But
I'll go. Are any of you aware of examples around the state where school districts or ports got involved, either working with cities or directly with nonprofits to provide land for affordable housing?
I know that there is some interest, and there is the ability for school districts at least to do it, and I would think for ports, but I don't know definitively. So I think it's one of the many partnerships that should be explored. So, but a lot of these questions, I think we're going to have to do some follow-up research and maybe figure out a way to get it out to all of you. These are great questions.
So in Miami, I don't know if local examples, because I haven't looked into it, but I know in Miami-Dade County in Florida, they are doing some partnerships between the county and some school districts around pairing affordable housing and school buildings. So there's an example of a school using some school bond dollars to build a school within an affordable housing project on one of the public housing authority properties, and now they're looking at doing the reverse, where the school district will make available some property that they can build affordable housing on. And so you might want to look at Miami-Dade County. One of them's under construction, and I believe the others are several different partnerships that Miami-Dade County are looking at with school districts.
Hi, Thatcher. Great presentation. You told us earlier that Sound Transit cannot buy land for transit-oriented development, but you can convert land used for staging later on. And I'm just curious, what is staging? I'm guessing it's where you park the bulldozers, but I don't know. I don't build railroads.
Oh, thank you for that clarifying question. Yes, so basically, there's a couple of ways that we end up with property that could be available for TOD later. One would be we need to build a station, and for, say, 5-10 years, we're going to have everything from construction vehicles, the trailers. That's what I mean by construction staging. It might have, if it's a tunnel, it's got concrete tunnel rings sitting on it, which was the case of our Roosevelt property that became Cedar Crossing. The others would be, we're coming in and we're going to take a part of your property, and because we need to run a guideway through it, but because we're coming in and just taking a piece of it, there are certain circumstances where we will economically damage their property to such a degree that they want us to acquire the whole thing. So those are circumstances where we might end up with enough property that's left over. You might see those from other transportation projects too. When people make roundabouts, things like that, they might impact a property enough where there'd be leftover land. Usually the problem with that is that it's not big enough on its own. It might be 20,000 square feet. And so you need somebody to go and buy the adjacent property so that you can get enough to build something of substance.
I'll also add to that list that Sound Transit, I know, has purchased property where they thought maybe they were going to do a station, and then that didn't happen. So he had the rise up there, which this is what we call a 4 and 9%. So some of it's permanent supportive housing, some of it's workforce housing. We originally called that project Mad Boy because it was on the corner of Madison and Boylston. It now has a more marketable name than Mad Boy. But nonetheless, there is no station there as far as I know, but we now have affordable housing. And if you were here at the presentation just before this one, it was also featured, Lisa Vatsky had it up as an example of a project where we have a partnership with Swedish Hospital in terms of the permanent supportive housing for that project. I don't know if the hospital would have gotten involved if it wasn't quite so close to where the hospital is. And so they have a real interest in having both the workforce housing, but also potential users of Swedish healthcare services and the PSH as well.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for your presentations today. I know that one of the presentations mentioned sale notifications to jurisdictions, and I know that other states like California have formalized required right of first refusal processes for all of their surplus land for affordable housing purposes. I'm just wondering if any of you have specific thoughts on how something like that might play out in Washington.
I know, I believe it's under RCW 39. I can't remember the rest of it. There's so many RCWs, but under our RCWs for DNR, and it does direct every other state agency that has property that we have to give a notification, then we're going to dispose of property, and it tells us we have to let the local county commissioners, we need to let the city, we need to know other state agencies. So we do our best to trying to get this outreach done. In Washington State, for our agency, it's a 60-day notification. So we send that notification out to all those governmental entities that we think could or would want to purchase property. So if there's a school district there, we do that. We do our best to get that, keep that list as updated as we can. We also do a notification to all the tribes in that area. And then it's a 60-day, and we have 60 days to come back and say, hey, and raise their hand and say, hey, we're interested in talking to you. Sometimes it pans out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we've had a property that came to us, and we had 2 different entities come to us, and ironically, they both wanted different bits, but they weren't at that time subdivided, and then they both bailed on it, and then we had somebody else come in and we didn't want to sell it, so it was a long story. But that's how sometimes a lot of the properties like this one in Tacoma that we're looking at, we gave a notification out, and we gave some, and there were originally 5 properties. We're looking at only taking 3 to auction now. One, the Nisqually tribe came up to us and they said, hey, could you not sell that? We'd be interested in purchasing it. So we took that off the auction block, and when was this other one that we're going to transfer, hopefully, to Pierce County Community Development. So that's just how DNR works. I'm not sure what other entities besides other state agencies are required to do.
I think one question, what comes to my mind is what problem is trying to be solved? And I know local control versus state kind of directives is always a fraught issue, and maybe it's because it's late in the afternoon, I'm feeling a little punchy. I think, I'd just flag that, there's jurisdictions of the willing, those that want to do affordable housing and see getting a first right, if they were feeling like the agency that they were trying to acquire the property from wasn't working towards the same goal, right? So local control could allow them to get affordable housing that maybe the other agency wasn't going to do, right? But then the flip side of that is it's just a lot of process. And so I think, you can also look at like California, where they're also frustrated with local governments that have really prevented development from happening and leading to their undersupply, and it led to some very weird state legislation that basically gave BART, the San Francisco region's transit agency, land use control if the local jurisdictions didn't adopt certain zoning to a certain threshold, right? So if the local jurisdictions don't adopt zoning that's supportive of TOD, then BART has to implement new zoning code for their property. And so that got most of the jurisdictions to like do with the work, but that's like a very blunt tool. And so again, it's like, why are states doing that? They're frustrated with certain local governments not doing their part. So I guess I just look, when I hear about local control, it's kind of like, well, is this about a government agency that, which government problem are you trying to solve? The special purpose government, and the city could do it better, or is it more about the local government not wanting to have this other entity carry out some other affordable housing goal, as an example? That might be a better conversation over happy hour.
I had a question regarding the DNR. No, did you?
Yeah. This will probably be the last question. I just want people to know.
Oh, okay. Had you experienced a situation where there were more than one entity that was interested in a property, and how did you guys go through a selection process of?
It didn't turn out so well. The one that I do know of, we had a main local jurisdiction, and this is one I know about for sure. If it really comes to blows, we will end up taking it to public auction. There could be some, and that was between a tribe and a local jurisdiction, and we didn't want to get in between that. So there was that hands off. Other times we've done the best to try and negotiate. Like I said, sometimes our parcels are really big, sometimes they're smaller. We just trying to work, like, what is the purpose? And I've gotten entities to like step back. Like when I figured out the one that didn't end up happening, one was a local jurisdiction and another was a tribe. And like I said, at one point, they were both thinking of different parts of the property. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out in that particular parcel just because DOT and roads and road approaches and some wetlands. Those are some things like that. But we usually try and look at those sort of things. I think there is a little bit of leeway from the legislature and maybe the commissioner to pick something that would work better. I know our current commissioner is really looking to see how we can not say offer up land, but let people know that there's land here, and it's not going to be for resource management. It's not commercial. We could sell it at highest bid at auction, or we can see if we can have local developers find a way to do workforce housing. So I think that's a priority, but I'm not sure if it really came to blows. If we could get to pick, we might actually just have to take it to auction at that point.
Right now, I now find 3 questions that weren't there before. They suddenly loaded in. So I'm really sorry if you were one of those 3 people. After I announced there was no more questions, and I know people are anxious to get to the party and so forth. If you are one of these persons that asked a question online, I'm really sorry I didn't see it until now. You can come up. Some of them are for Thatcher, so just talk to the man. and maybe he could stay in the room, and we can answer those questions. Otherwise, you are released to go out and have fun for the rest of the day, and hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.